My stepmother and father are leaving me alone and going on a honeymoon with their daughters, so I made sure they don't come back into my house. She died of a stroke last year at the age of 47, leaving me this house as an inheritance. Although it came as a shock, I've come to terms with it. My parents shared custody of me after divorcing when I was 7 years old. I was with my mom for half the month and my dad for the other half. I must admit that because my mother understood me, we were closer. My 50-year-old father was always a little too busy for me. I received the impression that he was more focused on his work and ladies than he was on me. He didn't seem to prioritize me, but as long as I had my mother, I didn't mind. My dad made the decision to relocate to Houston for work a few years ago, shortly after I turned 18 and enrolled in college. We only met around the holidays and began to see each other less frequently. He joined us in celebrating Christmas 2 years ago with his then-girlfriend, 38-year-old Julia. She also brought her 2 daughters from her former relationship with her high school sweetheart, who are 16 and 18 years old. Before she began dating my dad, they had broken up for almost 7 years but had never been married. My dad had never brought a girlfriend to family gatherings, so we were taken aback. Nevertheless, we made every effort to make Julia and her girls feel at home and welcome them as warmly as possible. We all seemed to get along well at the time, and it was a very lovely evening. Even after that, Julia would always greet me when I called my dad, and she was really kind to me. Her daughters tended to keep to themselves because they were a little shy and introverted. Our relationship was nice overall. I learned that my mother left me the house after she died. Luckily, my mother always loved to plan ahead, especially in serious instances like these, so she distributed all of her assets in her will around the time I turned 18. I made the decision to move in and look for a job that wouldn't require me to relocate anytime soon because I had recently finished. I was comfortable in my childhood house, so I wanted to stay there for the next few years. After learning about the will, my dad made sure I knew that he wasn't pleased with my mom's choice. My dad was a little depressed when he realized he wouldn't be getting the house back, but he and Julia had been quite kind and encouraging at the funeral. My mom took over this house during the divorce, but my parents purchased it together when they first got married. Even though my mom sacrificed her job to stay at home and raise me so my dad could concentrate on his business, it was a fair arrangement because he got away with not paying alimony. In my opinion, it was entirely reasonable to keep the house in the settlement and release my dad from alimony. With some assistance from her parents, my mom recovered later, and she even made sure I never felt ignored or unimportant. She was good at both jobs. My dad was furious about not getting the house back, but I didn't mind. Although he didn't discuss it much, I could tell by his actions that he wasn't pleased about it. Since I was still grieving over my mother at the time and my dad's anger over her will was the least of my concerns, I didn't give a damn. It should have been sufficient for him because she had left him all of her bridal jewelry and the presents he had given her. A few weeks after the funeral, he and Julia returned to Houston, and I've been living here alone ever since. But my dad told me around 6 months ago that he was now engaged to Julia and that he planned to marry her in his house. It didn't make sense to remain in a hotel when there was a property with enough more rooms, so he intended to return here in the weeks before the wedding. In order to avoid any problems with schools, her daughters were likewise homeschooled. For a few reasons, I agreed with him and let them move into my home and reside with me before to the wedding. Since Julia and I got along well and I was sick of living alone, I didn't see any issues with letting them live with me. Additionally, I didn't have to worry about going over budget because my dad promised to split all of the costs with me while they were living here. They have been here ever since they moved in with me almost a month ago. I felt a lot less lonely than I did when I lived alone, and it was good to have them around. I believed I could adjust to this. I even looked forward to the day they all left and returned to their regular lives since I would have to do the same thing by myself. However, my dad asked me whether I would be open to letting them all reside here permanently 2 weeks ago, 3 days prior to the wedding. He stated that he had returned here to help me feel a little more at ease with the notion of living with him and becoming a member of a family, which was completely unexpected. The thought of me living here alone didn't sit well with him. Now that he believed we were getting along, he wanted to know if I would be open to making this a permanent arrangement, which he intended to introduce to me gradually. I wanted to say yes at once, but I was a little perplexed by his actions after learning that he wouldn't be getting the house back. I didn't believe it was a good idea to make it a permanent arrangement so soon, even though I would have wanted to. I didn't want to act on my feelings and make a mistake. I didn't have to let them all live with me, even though I knew this was the only sensible way to deal with my intense loneliness. They had barely been residing here for a month. I told him I needed some time to ponder, even though I really wanted to say yes. For whatever reason, I had a gut feeling that it would be best for me to wait and not make a hurried choice. I put aside my sentiments and promised to let him know what I had decided after the wedding. Although he didn't bring up the subject, he appeared upset. We had a terrific time at their wedding, which took place 10 days ago. After the wedding, they were expected to remain here for a few more days before going back home. They all went off on their honeymoon without telling me, just as I was about to tell them what I had decided. Everyone had left when I woke up 2 days after their wedding, leaving me all by myself. I decided to call since many of their possessions were still at my place, but nobody picked up for a while. I kept worrying about it. For hours, I was unable to contact them, even though I had intended to inform them of my choice that same day. When Julia finally responded at lunchtime, she nonchalantly told me that they had all left for their honeymoon and wouldn't be returning for a week. I was taken aback because I clearly thought that even if I wasn't part of their plans, they would at least tell me about them before departing. I didn't want to sound petty, but I felt insulted that they hadn't asked me. I began by questioning why none of this had been communicated to me. Using the pathetic excuse that they had failed to inform me, she promised me that they would return shortly. That wasn't the purpose at all, I attempted to explain. My problem was that it was impolite of them to just walk out without saying anything or even saying goodbye. Her tone shifted when I mentioned that I wanted to speak with my dad. She claimed that my dad was too busy to speak with me. Nevertheless, I made an effort to remain composed and instructed her to notify me when he had some free time so that I could speak with him personally. I expressed it courteously, but she changed her attitude entirely. She changed from being kind to harsh and savage. She advised me not to worry them and informed me that my dad would be busy for the next few days. There was no need to act so hysterically just because they left me behind, she continued. She then felt compelled to remind me that I was no longer a child and that I had to come to terms with the fact that my dad had a new family. She went on to say that she wanted me to quit thinking about myself and tidy the house for them when they got home. She wasn't going to speak to me in that manner, and I'm not sure to whom she thought she was speaking. When she said that, she immediately hung up, and I was immediately furious. After seeing this side of his new wife, I thanked the world for keeping me from accepting my dad's offer and decided not to call him again. They were not going to live with me in any way. I therefore packed everything they owned as haphazardly and shoddily as I could, crammed it all into a few cardboard boxes, and left it in the yard for them to discover when they made the decision to come back. Since such items didn't belong to me and didn't belong in a house that belonged to me, I didn't give a damn what would happen to them. After that, I carried on with my life as usual, making an effort to ignore the sense of betrayal I had experienced due to my dad's senseless actions. They finally got back from their honeymoon yesterday. Fortunately, they discovered all of their belongings in the yard while I was at work. In the interim, I also replaced the door locks, which prevented them from entering. When my dad called me about it, he was furious. Since they hadn't done anything illegal and leaving me at home without warning wasn't something to be upset about, he told me I was being a spoiled child and that I was overreacting. I instructed him to get his boxes and go, and I would call the police if I saw them on my property when I got home. I couldn't waste time worrying about it because I had to return to work after he insulted me and hung up. They had taken their belongings and left when I arrived home from work. That seemed to be the end of it. The worst part, however, was still to come. My dad called me at midnight to let me know that Julia had something to say to me. She retracted everything she had said and expressed regret for the way she had spoken to me. She went on to say that she didn't want to remain on bad terms with me over something so trivial and that she would welcome a second chance to make things right. I didn't need her phony excuses, so I instructed her to stop talking and go away. Since I wouldn't be letting them live with me, I understand why she felt the need to act like a happy family. She wouldn't have delayed so long to acknowledge her mistake if she genuinely regretted what she had done. She would have apologized throughout their vacation or maybe immediately following that phone call. My dad probably doesn't regret anything either, but he decided to appear nostalgic when he knew I wouldn't forgive them. He accused me of being cold-hearted for not allowing them to live with me. He wanted to live in this house because it made him think of my mother, but he said he was willing to split all the expenses if I allowed him to return. He claimed that since he only wanted to feel closer to my mother, it would be self-centered of me to throw them out in this way without considering the consequences. He even attempted to justify Julia's actions by saying that she had simply had a rough day and that nothing she said was intended. He went on to say that his girls wanted to return and start anew because they missed me. However, I refused to accept any of that. Since the divorce, I'd known my dad had his eye on this house, and after seeing this side of Julia, I didn't want to take any chances. I told him that since I wasn't going to change my decision, they couldn't return. Suddenly, my father broke down in tears over the phone. He said that because I refused to let him reside in the home where he had the greatest days of his life, I was the most self-centered daughter ever. He claimed that I was being petty and harsh because of a minor argument with Julia and the fact that they hadn't invited me on their honeymoon, which wasn't even the primary point of contention. My mother would despise this ugly side of me, he said. After his wife mistreated me and they didn't even invite me to go on their honeymoon, am I the bad one for not letting my dad and his new family move back in with me? First update. My initial post didn't receive the kind of response I had anticipated. I get what everyone was trying to say, but I don't believe some of you needed to be so nasty about it. Since my dad doesn't deserve it, I stayed true to my resolve and didn't allow him to move back in. I don't need any more rudeness in my life, and that's all he's been so far. At first, he and Julia were both quite sweet to me, so it was lovely while it lasted. But my dad's true colors came out when I told him that I still needed time to ponder. Unfortunately, I'm not that weak. They probably ran out of patience and believed they could intimidate me into having them live with me. Being by myself is preferable to hanging out with the wrong people. His reaction when he discovered that the house deed had been moved to me rather than to him should have been enough to make me realize how materialistic and self-centered people can be when it comes to these things. Therefore, I shouldn't have allowed them here at all. Regarding Julia, I'm relieved that she decided to pointlessly argue with me and ultimately caused significant harm to herself. We all could have been a happy family, or at least I suppose we could have been, had she not spoken that. However, I will never fall for their deceptive tactics again, so that will never occur. All of my grandparents had already died, I was alone, and I missed my mother. I needed a family to be there for me, but these folks are obviously not capable of doing that. Fortunately, I discovered it before it was too late. Since they left a few days ago, my dad has been phoning me frequently and texting me because I don't pick up his calls. They don't deserve it, but he feels that I should at least give them one final chance to make amends. They squandered their one and only opportunity, and I have no doubt that they will do the same if I offer them another. It doesn't make sense to take that chance because it will impact me more than anyone else. Although I regret how I treated my dad, there isn't much I can do in this circumstance. He never bothered to put forth much effort with me, and you get what you sow. He never did anything for me, therefore he has no right to be upset when he understands that I won't base my decisions in life on him and his emotions. Second update. It seems like my dad is really desperate to move and not just insists on it. Can you guess why? He was fired a few months before his wedding and has been living off his savings ever since because he didn't take the vacation he claimed to have taken. Even though he had a sizable amount of funds, he eventually told Julia that they couldn't afford to return to Houston to try their luck after an elaborate wedding and honeymoon. He was unable to cover the rent, and Julia was unable to assist either because she had quit her job to become a housewife after meeting my dad. My dad expected that I would allow them to live with me, but now they needed to find a place here. Julia didn't even bother to apologize because she didn't know about any of this until he told her the truth. I was correct when I said that she lacked genuine regret for her actions. Even though she is completely fake, my dad deserves a woman like her. He got in touch with me once more today and asked if I could allow them to move in for a few days until he could find a good job that would pay enough to continue. However, I informed him that I would not do so. I didn't need that type of negativity about me, and they had been nasty. He's an adult. He ought to have realized that a luxurious wedding and honeymoon would be inappropriate if he didn't have a job. I can appreciate the desire to flaunt one's money, but only for those who can truly afford it, not for men who have 2 teenage stepdaughters and a housewife. I'm not to blame for his decision to disregard his obligations, even if he was fully aware of them. I'm not going to feel bad about prioritizing myself. Since I am no longer responsible for any of this, they may handle things on their own. I tried to be a little more courteous than I am here because I didn't want to come off as making fun of him or anything. I contacted him and stated the same things I mentioned here. Nevertheless, he chose to see it as a parody of the situation and informed me that I would be held accountable for my actions toward him. I didn't reply since I'm not sure how to react to that. He will now find a way to blame me for it and make it my responsibility, regardless of what I say. Therefore, it is preferable to be quiet and let him suffer. I scarcely care about it anymore. Third update. Today, my dad made the decision to leave the city. However, why would he depart without informing me of my shortcomings as a daughter? He could have gone in silence, but he and his wife are who they are. They decided to turn it into a big show. I haven't spoken to him in almost 3 weeks. After that, we didn't talk again, and he didn't even try to get in touch with me. However, he and Julia texted me today to tell me that they were overjoyed to tell me that Julia's ex-boyfriend had agreed to pay for their return journey and would even allow them to stay with him. He apparently had an epiphany that he needed to see his daughters as well. Although her ex-husband paid child support and Julia had full custody of her girls, he was never quite able to find time for them. After waiting long enough for my dad and Julia to resolve their differences amicably, he offered to clean up his own mess after realizing they were of no service. I guess this is fantastic for his daughters. At least some fathers do take charge, even if it's too late. I recognize that this might have been the only answer, but they didn't tell me all of this up front. A few hours earlier, they shared a photo of their girls along with a comment that included a 4-leaf clover sticker and a fortunate clover. I'm intelligent enough to deduce the possible true reason for Julia's ex's unexpected realization and the reason he's paying for their return trip. I'm not entirely sure why he would pay for all of their airline tickets, but I believe Julia's deceit and obstinacy may have played a role. I've witnessed it firsthand before, therefore I'm positive she exhibits such behavior. I'm glad they're going because this is the last time I'll see them. I'm not sure what actually happened. After reading some of the stories people posted about their wacky families, I also recognized how fortunate I was. My dad knows I won't think twice about calling the police, so you can be sure he's a little too concerned about his reputation to try to harm me in any manner. There's no need for me to worry because I've had enough training to know how to defend myself. I have even less reason to think about them now that they're going. For me, I suppose, hooray. I still get a little lonely sometimes, but I now talk to my friends instead of moping about it since I believe that's a healthier course of action in these kinds of circumstances. After my mother died, I totally shut myself off from the world, and it wasn't until I read these remarks that I realized how lonely I had become. I will attempt to live my life to the fullest now, even though it will take some time. In contrast to many individuals my age, I have a steady job, a respectable salary, and a home of my own. I'm really appreciative of my mother for it. What more could a person want, really, than wonderful friends who genuinely care about me? I'll simply return here if I get into difficulties again, and I have no doubt that the amazing individuals who read this will assist me again. Update 4. My father called me out of the blue today. He had been attempting to contact me via calls, messages, and social media, but I didn't want to speak with him, so it wasn't shocking. I finally responded because I wanted him to stop pestering me and because I wanted to know why he was so persistent. We hadn't spoken for a few months, so I knew this would be, to put it mildly, fascinating. When he informed me that Julia had chosen to reconcile with her ex, the same person who paid for their return trip, my amazement at hearing his voice after all this time changed to incredulity. She apparently chose to return to her former relationship after things with my father didn't work out as planned. My father was distraught and shocked. He requested an opportunity to make amends and mend our friendship, and he appeared sincere in his apologies for everything that had transpired. However, I couldn't help but feel uninterested after everything that had transpired. His and Julia's actions had caused me too much worry and suffering, and I no longer wanted to allow them back into my life. I expressed my regret to him, but I had already made up my mind and had no plans to change it. I remained steadfast in my stance, despite the desperate tone in his speech. I couldn't ignore the anguish they had given me, after all. My father has been attempting to reach me ever since, but I have blocked his calls and messages. I understand that it could be challenging for him, but I must put my own mental health and well-being first. That's it for now. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.